All right. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled meeting for the El Dorado Irrigation District Board of Directors to order. And please roll call vote, please. Not roll call vote yet. Roll call.
Meeting opened at 9:02 a.m. Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Veerkamp, Anzini, and Day present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Clerk to the Board Sullivan present.
All right. Director Dwyer, would you please lead us in Pledge of Allegiance? And we'll have a moment of silence for the children up in Pollock Pines. Thank you very much. Okay, we need to adopt our agenda. So moved. I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We'll give it a tie to the lady. All right, we have a second. Any discussion from the public? Questions? Seeing none. Anybody online, Jen, want to talk about the agenda?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Veerkamp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the adoption of today's agenda.
All right, I think we're ready for the vote. Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. Communications, general managers, employee recognition.
Good morning. I have two today. First, the district received a call from a lady named Teresa Smith, one of our customers, complimenting Matt Keeler, Chief Distribution Operator in drinking water. She stated that Matt was professional and courteous and completed the work efficiently. It's just another example of our employees providing excellent service. The second one, I'll ask Daniel to come up and make a presentation to one of our employees regarding Safety Award.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Always great to see everybody.
Good morning, Daniel.
Thank you. Today, I'd like to let you know that we had a staff member receive the H.R. Labounty Safety Award from Aqua JPIA for promoting safety in the workplace. The H.R. Labounty Safety Awards program recognizes Association of California Water Agencies, Joint Powers Insurance Authority, Aqua JPIA, water industry employees who implement significant safety improvements to prevent occupational injuries and illnesses. Today, we have the privilege of recognizing Matt Heap for his contribution in improving workplace safety. Matt, you want to come on up for me? Thank you. All right, here he is. Matt has been a district employee for 26 years and is EID's Hydro Operations and Maintenance Supervisor. Matt was awarded the H.R. Labounty Safety Award for his contribution to workplace safety by implementing accident prevention activities for rope work on EID's flumes. Here you go, Matt. Thank you very much. Yeah. So in order to maintain EID's vital flume system, staff implements an industry-leading fall protection program using ropes and harnesses to rappel off the sides of flumes and adjacent steep terrain to conduct repairs. Matt led the district's efforts to train staff in fall protection rope access, which involves both classroom training as well as practical exercises, including important job safety analysis prior to each job to allow staff to prepare and safely perform rope access work. So you can see on the picture on the left there, that's actually some of our practical training. Matt brought in an industrial rope access trade association certified trainer and actually shadowed the whole training. And then you could see on the photo on the right, there's our staff in the field actually putting all of their training to use there, doing some rappelling work. All right. Great. The next slide. Yep. And here's another use of the rope access equipment. We have some staff members here working on some steep, muddy terrain, and they're using their fall protection equipment to ensure that they stay safe and don't tumble down that hill there. And here's actually the job safety analysis that Matt actually created while he was evaluating some of the work. So now this is required anytime before staff uses any rope, performs any rope access work. They just evaluate their site-specific work location, identify the potential hazards, and then recommend job safety procedures. And after they do that, the whole crew comes together, talks about the hazards, and then ensure the job can be completed safely. So Matt's efforts also led to an update to the district's Code of Safe Practices with its Injury and Illness Prevention Program to recognize rope access work and its specialized safety considerations. On behalf of the district, it is our privilege to acknowledge Matt Heap for his contributions to improving workplace safety and congratulate him on being a recipient of the Aqua JPA HR LaBounty Safety Award. Outstanding job, Matt, in embodying the district's guiding principle of 100% safety.
Very good.
Mr. President. And Matt also got a little check with that. It wasn't just a piece of paper. So he has a little financial thank you. But again, it's just one sign of the commitment the district and all our employees have regarding safety.
Very good. Director Osborne and
At my short tenure here of nearly 22 years, I've known Matt, and cannot tell you how many people have told me what a gentleman he is when he goes out, even when he was on the crew. I mean, people would say, "This is a really, really great guy, and you're great to have him." So, thank you, Matt.
yeah, Matt, congratulations. Also, congratulations to Matt Keeler. We appreciate the good work. It's the rope rescue training and all that is really top notch. So that's great work. George, you know what it takes to get that job done. So very good. So again,
I think the board should get that training.
You see him hanging by those ropes?
No, it looks interesting to me.
I think George has had that one where he's over the fishing hole and he gets lowered down into the right spot. But again, thank you and congratulations. All right, public comment. Do we have any public comment in the room? Seeing none, public comment online.
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is the time for any items not appearing on today's agenda. President Camp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Communications, General Manager.
None today, thank you.
All right, Clerk of the Board.
No, thank you.
All right, Board of Directors. Awful quiet here. All right, I've got a couple. LAFCO met just about 2 weeks ago now. We had 2 presentations, one on incorporation and one on the state of the fire service. It was quite interesting. Also, through the election process, Tim White was reelected as a LAFCO commissioner, and Mike Saunders was elected also as an alternate. I'd like to remind everybody as well, the El Dorado County Fair kicks off this Thursday. 2 highlights on Saturday is the junior auction, junior livestock auctions. If you get a chance, go on out there and support our youth. And then Saturday night, there's this little thing called the John M. Studebaker Wheelbarrow Races that you may want to go take a look at because yours truly will be out there in a couple events. So, in the mud, yeah.
Chairman, are you the defending champion?
No, I'm not. Well, in the senior division, yes, but the the championship division where there's now 5 brothers, and it looks like all 5 of them will be in it this year. 4 of them placed 1 through 4 last year. They've all come up through the ranks, and they're tough. I spot them a few years, but we'll give them a run. Anyway, please support the fair. All right, we need to then go to the approval of the consent calendar.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second. Is there any input from the public? Anybody online wishing to comment on the consent calendar, Jen?
If members of the public would like to comment on today's consent calendar, now is the time. President Camp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the approval of the consent calendar. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. We are now on to our informational items. Item 5, engineering. Ms. Carrington, good morning.
Alrighty, good morning, members of the board. My name is Liz Carrington, Senior Civil Engineer here at the district. Thank you. Today I'll be presenting the Capital Improvement Plan Project Summary. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's presentation is to review recently completed capital improvement plan or capital improvement projects, provide information on construction expenditures and project balances, as well as provide an overview of projects that are currently in construction, FEMA recovery efforts, and grant applications. Next slide, please. All right, I'll be presenting two projects today. The first one is the Collections Facility Relocation Project. This project was substantially complete the end of March of this year, and crews moved in shortly thereafter. This is the north-facing side of the building. Next slide. I just wanted to share a few photos of the inside to walk you through the building. This is the warehouse area. We're still getting moved in and getting situated. But so far, we have all of our items at this new facility. Next slide. This is the third bay on the east side of the building. This doubles as a mechanics shop as well as a fleet maintenance shop. And so our main fleet maintenance occurs up at headquarters, but this is a satellite facility so that fleet maintenance can bring their tools down and perform minor vehicle maintenance down at this remote site. Next slide. All right, on the left, we have the new lockers for our staff, and then we also have 3 showers, proper facilities for donning and doffing for our collection staff. Next slide. All right, we have the leads office area and then the large ballroom. Part of the benefits of this facility is every staff person has a seat to sit in. It is a compact seat, but at least everyone has a spot to sit, do their time cards, and do their target solutions training. Also, we have the high table in the middle where we can roll out traffic control plans, roll out improvement plans, and workshop any of those issues that arise. Next slide. Alrighty. So as we were in the design of this project, we saw some future expansion opportunities. The warehouse itself had to be elevated due to the roll-up doors and all the shelving that's required. So by just adding a couple feet on top of the building, we added the second story, and it's not finished. We definitely have some opportunities for tenant improvements in the future, but we want to take advantage of the additional square footage at this time. Next slide. In total, we had about $4.5 million in planned expenditures. Authorized for construction was about 5.7. When bids came in, that was on the heels of COVID, so we did have some elevated construction costs. Remaining balance at this time is $67,000. And in total, we have about 7% of change orders for the construction contract, which typically industry standard is between 10 and 15. So actually, we did really, really well in this project. Next slide. All right, Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant blower replacement.
Before you go on with that,
Yes.
just an observation. I think it's a tremendous improvement for the collections crew. Director Anzini and I toured the old facility at Bass Lake, if you could call it a facility, I think it was. And it's just a right way to do things, so good job on getting it done. Thanks, Tracy, for pushing it.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. And next project, we have a Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant blower replacement project. Deer Creek being a wastewater treatment plant, we do have a biological component to the process. We do have a population of microorganisms that consume and metabolize the organic matter in wastewater. And in order to do that, those organisms need oxygen. So we have 4 blowers at Deer Creek. These are 2 of the old existing ones. 1 of them did fail. So 1 out of the 4 has failed. 3 out of the 4, same genre. So at this time, we decided to just replace 2 of the 4. Next slide. We replaced it with one that had a wider span operating parameters, and so we do have some efficiencies for those lower flow times. And so moving forward, you'll probably see another blower replacement project on the CIP for those additional 2 blowers. Planned expenditures was about $450,000. Total authorized for construction was $713,000. Again, on the heels of COVID, a little bit elevated prices. Remaining balance is $86,000. And again, some great numbers for contract change orders, only 1.7%. Next slide.
Great.
So in addition to just 2 of the projects that we've completed, right now is a really busy time for the engineering group. So we have over 100 capital improvement projects that are managed by the district's team of 6 engineers, project managers. Total authorized is $132 million. And that ranges from studies, basic design, design construction, construction closeout, and capitalized equipment procurement. So although I'm only showcasing 2 that are completed, we have quite a bit going on upstairs. 6 projects are in construction right now with a total of $24 million of authorized funding. Next slide. So just to highlight a couple, we do have the El Dorado Hills Wastewater Treatment Plant WASDAF unit. This one is very, very close to being complete, and so we'll see this next time. Part of this was to yes.
Could you explain what DAFT means? You were very quick when you said that, and I
Yeah.
couldn't hear it.
Waste activated sludge dissolved air flotation thickening device.
Dissolve air,
Flotation thickening.
oh, thank you.
Yes, yeah. So it's so let me back up a little bit. So part of this in the next slide, but so the project was to rehab some of the concrete and then replace all of the metal and mechanical components. And so we have pressurized air in the water, and it's injected into the waste stream. And so part of that is the sludge adheres to that dissolved air and either floats to the top or settles down. And so that's why you have that dissolved air flotation thickening, so because it actually adheres to the air in the water and floats all the way up.
And you know what floats all the way up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we like to skim off the top and send that off to the treatment train. So alrighty, next slide. And we did have some efficiencies here. So originally we had a pressurized air vessel, and we decided to take that out and replace that with 2 EDOR pumps. All around safer to not have a pressurized air vessel in a building, and also more efficient pumps. And this one I did want to say too during construction. So the engineering group, we really try to work with our operations to say, here's a solution, but also how are we actually going to build this thing? How is that going to affect our process? And so part of this project was to get a temporary unit, and so we were able to continue with that treatment process while the project was being built. So I think if we didn't have that temporary unit, it would have been really close. We were not anticipating the storm event that we had this year, so it was a really good thing that we had the temporary unit to help us through that winter season. Alrighty, next slide. Another project that we have going on right now is the collection system rehabilitation. It's pipelining and manhole lining throughout their collection system. It's a very cost-effective way to rehab our infrastructure when those deficiencies yield such a rehab process. Next slide. All right. So out of all of our projects in construction, we have a wide variety. I just wanted to showcase a few of them, but we have 6, Mother Lode Forest Main. We're doing some potholing right now, and so you'll see that out on Pleasant Valley Road, Mother Lode Drive. Bass Lake Tanks, which Kaylee's come and presented about that project. The WASDAF, which is very close to being done. The rehab project, again, we're finishing up that project. Reservoir A PLC upgrade, that we're in the final integration and testing. Animal control fencing, we're about to kick that off after the 4th of July. And then the secondary effluent pump station, that's in process as well. Next slide. So in addition to spending quite a bit of money, the engineering group also spends quite a bit of time and effort trying to secure some non-rate revenue through FEMA recovery efforts, grants, and such. So the public assistance grant that we have for Caldor Fire and the storms, those are still in process. We're making some good headway on that. So staff will come back at a later date to provide a summary of the money that we received from FEMA as well as insurance. Also, there's some proactive opportunities to get money through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant, BRIC grant, and then also Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So all of these listed on the slides have either been submitted for or we're developing applications right now. Backup generators, we did receive $1.8 million in grant funding. Staff is trying to secure an additional $1.8 million just because prices of generators have gone up exponentially. Also, we look at flumes, 45, 46, 48, and then also a new one, we're trying to develop a application for floating cover replacement. So some of our California counterparts have had some not great luck with floating covers, and they're not resistant to wildfires by any means. So we are submitting an application to replace the floating covers for Reservoir 1 and Pollock Pines with concrete tanks. So we'll let you know if we are successful with that one as well. Next slide. And then other grant loan programs that we're always keeping an eye on. It's the Drinking Water and Clean Water State Revolving Fund, Division of Boating Waterways, Department of Energy, and Wildfire Defense Program. Specifically, we look at those programs, and then we also look at projects that would fit. Like Silver Lake Dam is one that we're really keeping a fine-tooth, but close eye on to see which grant opportunities we can fit in those. Next slide. Alrighty, any questions or comments?
Look like Director Osborne?
Jim indicated to me the other day that we had received some FEMA reimbursement. Could you enlighten us on that?
Yes, I think it's the next board meeting, we'll have a summary of all the FEMA reimbursements we had.
Okay.
I think we had canal fencing was one of the ones we got monies for, but we're packaging all that up for the board presentation.
Very good, thanks.
Not quite sure that'll be ready at the next board meeting, but very soon. As soon as we have that information together, we'll be back.
And we did provide the memo to the board to say what we had applied to.
Yeah, it was a question I asked last time. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Liz. Have a great day. Any of the public wants, any questions or?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item number 5, now is your time. The board will not be taking action. It's just a time for comment. President Veerkamp does not appear. Any members of the public are wishing to speak on information item number 5.
Thank you, Jen. We'll move into our workshop items, and item 6, Ms. Bandy, good morning.
Okay, good morning, President Veerkamp, members of the board, Jamie Bandy, Director of Finance. We're here this morning with the cost of service analysis workshop. Next slide, Jen. Some previous board action. In 2020, the board adopted the results of the 2020 cost of service analysis. Since then, late last year and into this year, the board also adopted the 2023 to 2027 capital improvement plan, the 23 to 24 operating budget, as well as the 2023 to 27 financial plan. Earlier this year, the board did receive an overview of the cost of service analysis process and what the requirements are with that. And in February, the board awarded a contract to NBS Government Finance Group to conduct this analysis. So our summary of issue, again, we awarded a contract to NBS to conduct an updated cost of service analysis. Part of the analysis includes workshops. The workshop today is going to focus on really the board's discussion regarding the following objectives. So we'll be looking at policy objectives, rate structure design, reserve policies, as well as the coverage policies, and really just looking at priorities for developing the proposed rates. Some background discussion. Again, the cost of service analysis is the process of developing rates that meet but do not exceed the cost required to provide the services. And the district does conduct this analysis in compliance with Proposition 218, which has very specific requirements anytime we're considering rate increases. Our rate setting policy principles, they are the key components in conducting the analysis. They were initially developed during the 2010 cost of service analysis. Most recently, they were reviewed by the board in November 2019 and then discussed again in January 2023 when we were kind of overviewing this entire process. And as of today, staff does not propose any changes to those policies or to those principles. The next couple of slides highlights, there are 12 principles altogether. We'll just kind of go through these slides. I won't read through the principles, but they are here for reference if we need to look at them. Next slide, and one more. Members of the NBS team are here today. So at this time, I would like to welcome Greg Klumpner and Sanjay Gar up to the podium, and they will kind of take over the next part of this presentation.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, members of the board. It's been a while since I've been here. Maybe 10 years, 12, something like that. Okay. I am Greg Klumpner with NBS Consultants. I'm the project manager for this study. Sanjay Gar is working with us. We're going to do a little trade-off on some of these slides. So the things we're going to cover today are, we're going to give a little overview of what a rate study is. Most of you are fairly familiar with that, but just kind of the basics. And then delve into Prop 218 a little bit. There's continues to be new things coming up with Prop 218, so it's always kind of an ongoing question about, how's this going to affect our rate study? Rate structure discussion is usually one of the more interesting parts of a rate study because that's the most impact on the ratepayers themselves. There's a lot of reserve policies that we're going to delve into and cover. You've got a lot of reserve funds. How those should be funded, what target funding ending balances there should be. All of that is a discussion that has a lot to do with not only rate setting, but just the overall financial management of the utility. So we're going to cover the coverage ratio, the schedule, then talk about next steps. So the three major components, and this really has not ever changed since I started consulting 40 years ago. This was the same as it is today. The three main parts, and these are kind of done as separate studies, but the financial plan really looks at your budgeting, your capital improvements, your reserve targets. That's a whole thing that deals with just the financial components of the study. The bottom line is, what do we need to recover from rates? What's the net revenue requirement that needs to come from rates? Once you define that amount, the second part, the cost of service, is looking at how those costs should be allocated fairly out under Prop 218, fairly out to the different customer classes based on their demands on the system. As it says there, how do we slice the pie? That can be a little contentious, but that's a fairly technical, cut and dried type of analysis. The rate design, the third part, is where there's a lot of discussion because there's actually still a lot of leeway in how you do that, how you allocate fixed and variable costs, the tiered rates, getting into the cost allocations as they apply to the rates themselves is usually where most lawsuits are occurring today. And also this is highly customized to each utility. So depending on your policies and what you want and when you start looking at the impacts on individual customers, this is where most of that work is done. So we're going to do a little trade-off here, and Sanjay is going to cover the Prop 218 and some of the other discussions about the rate study, and I'll come back in a couple of minutes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sanjay Gar. I'm with Water Resource Economics. I'm a sub with NBS. President, board members, staff, and public, it's my pleasure to be here. It's my first time with you to talk about rate studies, and it's my honor to be here. So we're going to talk a bit about Prop 218 and sort of the landscape of how that's changed over time. The main thing is that Prop 218 was a voter initiative, and then through a series of court cases, the interpretation of Prop 218 and how it applies to water and wastewater service has changed. So that's the big thing. So the big one, when I first started working in this business, was the Bighorn decision where the judge said that water and wastewater is property-related service. And that people were surprised and like, okay, so what's the next thing does that mean? And then, so there needs to be a proportionality, there needs to be a requirement of that service. And then the next one was San Juan Capistrano. And that was the next sort of earthquake in the rate world, where basically the judge said that we need to show, first we need to have a administrative record. That administrative record needs to show the math and logic behind the rate calculation, and there needs to be a rationality. Now, the judge did rule on certain things. For instance, the judge did rule that recycled rates can be separate than water, and that the higher tiers of potable waters could help offset recycle because there is an indirect benefit. By having recycled water, we have more drought resiliency. And as we all know in California, droughts is going to be the future, whether it's regulatory droughts or actual droughts, whatever we want to call it, those are part of our future. So because of that, the two implications are is that first we need to understand the business model of running our utility. What's our cost structure? What's the driver of our costs? And the challenge here is that water, a lot of times when people look at the government agencies across like police or schools, and then they look at water or wastewater industry, they think they're similar, but they're very, very different because, as you know, water and wastewater is highly capital intensive. You just had a presentation about that. So a lot of your cost is there. You're managing assets for 50 years, 100 years. So your stewardships for very long. It's not a one-year operating budget. So it's a little bit of a different framework of thinking than the county maybe or a city. The other one is that rates can't subsidize. We can't have rates that subsidize other customers. We have to look at what's the cost of providing that service. Now, there is still room to achieve certain goals and objectives that you have within Prop 218, and we're going to work with you on doing that, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Next slide, please. So given Prop 218, as I mentioned, and Greg mentioned this too, is there is some flexibility still in the business model of how to allocate costs. And let me just give you one example, is peaking. So again, water is an interesting business because a lot of times people think water is just water, that's what it is. But there's actually a different cost to provide water in the summertime and in the wintertime, and that's because of the infrastructure that's needed. In the summertime, a lot more infrastructure is needed. That cost right there, even though it's a one-time sink cost or capital R&R cost, the question is how should you allocate that? Should that be based on potential use? So that'll be the meter size, bigger your meter, more instantaneous capacity you have. Or should it be based on the historical use of someone's consumption? Both arguments are right, of course. It's just a policy. And that has implications about whether it should be on the meter charge, which would increase your fixed charge, or it should be on the commodity, would increase your variable charge, which promotes affordability and conservation. So what we want to do is we want to get your input now at the start of the study about what makes sense. What is the right rate structure, or the policies behind it? And then based on that policy that you tell us, then Greg and I can start working on what rate structure achieves that goal and objective. So we have a couple of policies here. We worked with staff to determine that. And the question is first, we've confirmed that the guiding rate setting process is good. But these are almost like we're getting a little bit more, peeling back the onion in some sense of getting more into the details about what is the right rate structure for us. So we have, these are the identifications. They're in alphabetical order. So we're not, we have to put them in some kind of order. So I just did alphabetical. So affordability is one subset. And even within affordability, you may have discussions about what is affordable. Affordable for who, right? Because is it the low-end water users? Is it the high-end water users? Is it average water users? Who do we really care about? So that's something to think about. Conservation, that in the past has been very important in California. We've done an excellent job in conserving water. Some people even argue we've maybe done too good of a job, but so that's a policy. You'll tell us what you think about that. Continuity of rate design. So that's the concept there is that we have done a lot of great work. We have this rate structure. Stability is good. There's nothing wrong with stability, and maybe we should continue on that path. So that's another policy. Infrastructure reliability. As we all know, infrastructure, we're the era of replacement. That's the EPA coined this expression that as a water community, wastewater community, we're in this huge replacement era. You've seen a lot of vulnerability with fire situations. The criticality of making sure that water is available and wastewater service is available 24/7, 7 days a week. And how important is that? And that means you know, the implications that maybe we would need increased revenues even more to make sure we do that. And that there's a balancing act there with affordability and then revenue stability. That's making sure we have that revenue there during different conditions of drought and economic situations. So as you can see clearly, these conflict with each other. There isn't, I'm sorry, I'm putting you in the spot here, but it is basically a balancing act, and that's why we're asking your objectives. So if you feel comfortable, what I was hoping to do is we can have a dialogue here. If you want to, you can even rank them and put them in order. You can do that on your, you can tell us, and I can take notes. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. One step ahead of me, I appreciate that. So what is the most important for the board, and which one should we do? So I'm going to stop here, and love to hear your input.
Director Dwyer.
If I could jump in, I think this is a very healthy exercise for us to go through because it does reflect the priorities of the board and the organization. I have a proposed ranking that we can debate, I'm sure, but I would say infrastructure is number one. That's primarily our mission. If we don't have the infrastructure, we can't accomplish all of our objectives and mission. So I'd say that's number one. Revenue stability. I think that's important for the board. It's important for our bond rating. It's important for our customers. So I would rate that as number two. Affordability, number three. Continuity of rate design, you know, it's been a long, hard process as we try to educate ourselves and our customers as to how do we put these rates together. We've got a table. It's widely distributed. It affects development. It affects a lot of things. So I think if we can kind of keep the same path instead of scrapping the whole rate structure and starting over from the beginning, I think that's important. And then I'd rate conservation last, number five. And my logic is it's conservation, that means we're going to charge more on the commodity side, and it's punitive for people, especially people of limited means. So punishing people for using water, which is what we do in this rate structure, is, in my opinion, really kind of down on the list and not the most important. So that's just the way I'd write them. Open to comments. You can say, yeah.
Director Day.
Yeah, a slightly different order, but not much different. I don't think anybody would be surprised that affordability would be number one for me because preserving our communities and the ability of families to live in El Dorado County is a big challenge. We're aging, and I think we need to consider affordability to be able to continue to attract new young families to the community. So that's huge to me. But then hand in hand, revenue stability would be number two for me, and that goes kind of hand in hand. Where I lost my track. Infrastructure, reliability. Those two occur neck and neck. They could be two or three, and I don't have a particular preference. They're both very important, and they both are very closely connected to each other. The tension is between those two and affordability. And then conservation, I agree with your comments, Pat, and I'd put that at number four. And then rate structure, continuity of rate structure. Our rate structure is very complex right now, and I would like to see us streamline it and simplify it. Over the years with our different 218 notices and such, I have a friend who's in the Army Corps engineer, a friend who's a CPA, and a friend who's a lawyer, and I've given them our stuff and said, you have 5 minutes, tell me what it's about. And these are highly educated people, and they were very challenged. So we really need to simplify it as much as we can.
Okay. I will also concur that affordability is my number one. The people I represent are of my age or older. The easy part of this whole thing is easy presentation to what they have to pay. And again, the biggest shock of my life when I opened up the rate schedule, and I've looked at it many times, it is so complex, it is hard to justify, or at least not justify, hard to present to your neighbors on how come their water rate is different than this community's, or why that water rate. And no matter how much we try to simplify it, we've made it too complex. So the rate structure really needs to be simple. Part of that is the education of our ratepayers. I don't believe we educate them enough about conserving, about what they can do to make their water bill go down, about reading their basic bills. We have all kinds of tools online, but there still has to be a eye-to-eye and mouth-to-mouth contact with everybody. And I don't believe that the affordability part is easy to present. However, we need to make it very easy to present. And my next one would be that rate design, because most people who retire in our area are very educated. But it's, even the most educated person, a PhD, would look at that rate structure and go, what the heck is this? Then you have to explain about agricultural rates. Then you have to explain about the use rates. And the other part, of course, is infrastructure reliability. I agree with Director Dwyer. That is the most important component for our public health. And if the infrastructure is not reliable, that's another education piece for people to understand how much our budget goes out for infrastructure maintenance and improvements. So, my belief is the affordability and the rate design is easy to understand. The rest comes together. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Director Osborne.
Well, I agree with Director Anzini. My issue has always been affordability. And its problem is we have a dichotomy in our service area. We have an agricultural component on the east end of there, which is a huge driving force for the economy of this county. But on the west end, we have basically an urban system. And explaining to people how that difference is, why we have an ag rate. Well, it goes back years and years ago when we abandoned the ditches. They don't need potable water for irrigation, but it was a whole lot cheaper to run one system than it was a dual system. And it's hard for people to understand, especially people that just come here from the urban areas. Why is my water bill so high? Well, if you look at an urban area, you got a mile of pipe, you might have 50 homes on it. Here, you might have 3. And it's the same pipe. It's the same cost. It's the same cost to maintain it. And so it's a difficult perception for people. Even my own wife says, man, our water bill is high. And I said, well, if we didn't irrigate an acre and a half of lawn, we'd probably have it, and flowers and everything else. But that, and I think one of the other things, and my next thing is infrastructure. We have spent, and it kind of, infrastructure and conservation to me are kind of blended together in that we have spent an enormous amount of money guaranteeing a water supply. And even in last year when we were in, quote, drought conditions, I tell people, we've spent a lot of money but we have water. The rest of the state is in serious trouble, but because of years and years of good engineering, good consensus on the board and everything else, we built an infrastructure and Upper Lakes, and when we bought Project 184, that was a huge thing. When we even today, when we just completed the construction of the Four Bay Reservoir, We went from a day and a half to 6.5 days of water supply. Those kind of things are not cheap. But when people are talking about in Oakland, they can't turn the faucet on, and we say, well, we're mandated by a 15% by the state to save water, that we have the water, and we're in good shape. And so reliability I think, it kind of dovetails into infrastructure. You know, we've got a lot of old infrastructure that needs replacing. And our engineering department does a great job prioritizing. I'm getting the right words. Anyway, you don't understand what I mean. But I guess my thing is explaining to people the cost of the billing, why their bill is in, and that's our public relations people, you know. And I think we could dive into the fact that we don't have ditch water anymore. They don't need ditch water. I mean, they could use it, but the cost of maintaining both systems would be enormous. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Thank you. Question for our consultant. Do you want us to narrow down one top or a culmination of maybe 3? Because I'm hearing affordability, infrastructure reliability, and revenue stability. I can't be affordable if my infrastructure is all rotten and breaking every day. So I think there's a major combination of those 3. Obviously, we would like to have revenue stability, or we can't plan ahead and make projects work. So would a culmination of those 3 give you the direction that you need? You know, 'cause you're also hearing conservation and continuity rate design sort of down at the bottom, but does that help? Because that's where I'm at. I mean, affordability obviously is the important thing for all of us, but regulation happens daily. We're going to hear a report here in a little bit about potential more regulation, and I mean, there's things that are out of our control that set these things into motion that, again, then it's about trying to explain to the poor public what the heck's going on, and maybe they'll help us vote for certain things. But those 3 in my book are where it's at. And if I had to get down to 2, it would be obviously affordability and infrastructure reliability as the top. Conflict. Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, we see what the cost and continued cost increases of keeping that infrastructure up, and we know what we've got, and we're behind the curve on that, unfortunately.
Sanjay, we're relying on you to resolve the conflict.
That's my job.
I think Jim's got a comment.
Yeah, I'm really glad our board's that smart because they matched my top 3 priorities, so I appreciate that.
I will just add, I am absolutely aghast at the price of plumbing. I go down to Home Depot, and a fitting that used to be 40 cents is now $1.29 a tee, a plastic tee. I mean, everything is just skyrocketed in costs, and that's a direct influence on what we have to pay a contractor to come in and do a job. And labor costs going up, but just the basic materials that we have to have, pipe and whatever, chemicals and everything else have skyrocketed.
Right, and we're gonna have to try to do some predicting here as well, because obviously we know we've got potential of other environmental regulations that may be cast upon us, fleet replacement, and electrification, and boy, you just, I don't even want to talk about the cost of that stuff.
You get yourself into a rant.
Exactly. But anyway,
need that.
is that a good enough direction?
That's an excellent direction. That's what I was hoping
Okay,
for.
all
So
right.
you identified 3 top priorities, and now our job, that's why you're paying us, is to figure out this balancing act and come out with a couple of options.
Okay,
But I really do appreciate your input
Right.
and your comments, so that's great.
very good work.
So now we have some discussion slides. They're not necessarily, we have any solutions, of course, but these are just things that Greg and I, when we reviewed the rate structure and given the legal landscape and how things have changed, you know, what should we be looking at? So a couple of things that we're going to be talking about, and you actually echoed these things too, which is simplification of the rate structure. For instance, right now, you do have different 1-inch meter charges for single-family, multifamily, commercial, recreational, turf, ag, and raw water. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at is some kind of simplification that makes sense. We do understand or acknowledge the importance of agricultural and raw water in the community and the economic viability it provides. So we'll be doing a little bit of a balancing act there with Prop 218 too. So we'll figure out how to do that, but I would like to simplify single-family, multifamily, and commercial and recreational turf, just sort of the top of my head as a first step. And that will help simplify the rate structure, the Prop 218 notice. But again, we'll be working, and definitely, I'm going to be throwing out ideas here, and then if you're like, time out, do not go there, I want to hear that, because I don't want to waste, there's many roads here, right? And we're just trying to figure out which road makes sense, what's our journey. The second one is combining customer class, similar to the first one, where again, you have a lot of different rate structures. My view is that residential and multifamily should be one customer class. It's basically the same kind of indoor needs, health and safety, outdoor water use. Commercial, landscaping, and recreational turf most likely is one customer class. Again, very similar in the sense that it's outdoor water use. And then ag, irrigation, and small farmers would be another subset class, again, to address that socioeconomic concerns with, still complying with Prop 218.
Thoughts?
No,
You
it
okay?
sounds like a good direction. I like it.
Yeah, I'm getting nods, so.
All right. Yeah, I saw a lot of nods, so that's why I didn't. I assume if there was a.
Kind of knew we were going to come that way at you today
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, today. But today is a foundational meeting because, we're about to start the diving into the models and developing all the Excel spreadsheets. And, we don't want to waste your resources and your time looking at things that doesn't make sense. So that's why today's a very pivotal meeting because it's that direction. The next one's recycled. We've received quite a bit of emails about recycled rates. It is important to make sure we have rates that comply with Prop 218 that are justifiable. Currently, you have a 3-tiered for residential. You have a 1-rate structure uniform for commercial and recreational. We would like to, look at that and start asking ourselves, maybe is there a way to simplify that again? That's another simplification. There is in the emails, and we also acknowledge that internally that, there is recycled water available in the wintertime. In the summertime, the demand is higher, so we have to supplement that with potable. So that needs to be addressed. And how do we address that? Is that a summer versus winter rate? That could be one. Is it so should we do that for all the customer class? How should we manage that? So we'll be diving into that, looking into that, working with staff on that. If you have ideas or suggestions, definitely we want to hear about that today so that we get your input.
Well, an observation that taking the recycled rates for the customer base, either collectively or individually, and making a summer rate and a winter rate violates our principle of making the rates simpler and easier to understand. Now we've created another
Correct.
20 rate classes.
Good point.
I agree with that. That would, I think, more confusion. One observation over the years with recycled rates and recycled customers is during the droughts that we've had, well, first of all, I'm really not comfortable with that we supplement so much with potable water in the summertime, and I don't think the rates reflect that, and I think they should. So I think there could be some more balance there. And then, and I think because the rates are so low, below probably where they should be, during the droughts, conservation was not very good, not as good. Potable customers did a great job. Recycled customers did a so-so job on conservation. And so we had to supplement with more potable. So that was being taken away from the people who were conserving. So I'd like to see some more equitability amongst that, on those issues.
Yeah, just a side note on that. The way we have done it in the past is we charge the recycled water business Tier 3 potable water rates for the supplementation. So they're paying the Tier 3 price as we supplement, which we thought at the time is appropriate, and I still believe it is appropriate. I think the big difference with recycled water and potable water is customers on the potable water side have the ability to change their sprinkler systems and timing. The homeowners association, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, controls the recycled water timing and adjustments.
But not-
And I'm not sure we can change that,
Yeah,
but that's
not
an
quite-
issue.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Jim, but it's not quite accurate because there's a lot of people, like in Serrano, Four Seeds and so on, that they have, their backyards are on recycle as well. So the HOAs do control the front, but the homeowners have a great deal of control over the back. And so it is within their hands. And I've seen a lot of soggy backyards during the droughts with people on recycle because they thought, well, hey, I'm on recycle, I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
And they weren't really quite. I'd have to educate or talk to them about it and realize, no, you're actually spraying potable water on your lawn and stuff, so you could cut back.
So definitely we'll be looking into this and seeing how much recycled water is being produced, how much potable water is being supplemented in the summertime, and then dealing with that equity concern.
You know, in retrospect, this is probably going in a dangerous direction, but I wonder if we had to do it all over again, would we only supply recycled water to community, you know, the landscaping along the parkways and not do residential recycle? It'd be interesting to know if we took out the residential recycle and just put in the turf rate and all those things, is there enough water generated by the treatment plants to provide that commodity without supplementation? I'd like to know that. Just, we're probably too far down the road to actually withdraw recycle from individual customers, but it'd be interesting to know for our own education, is there enough water generated? Because, you know, I guess in defense, when that system was developed and conceptualized, there was going to be enough recycled water produced by the treatment plants to supply the potential customer base. Well, the building didn't occur, that, you know, the storage isn't there, and all the reasons. So we might want to just have that as a hip pocket number. Thanks.
Yeah, Director Osborne, and then Director Day.
I'm going to say, you know, we used to tout the fact that our recycle program was all the landscaping in a residence. And we would tout this statewide, say, hey, you know, our system is designed for people to conserve potable water because we use recycled water for all the irrigation. And now it's come back in a way to bite us in a way. You know, it's just a fact that we ended up with a lot more demand. And then we looked at, a few years ago, we looked at a reservoir down there and it was $50 million to build a reservoir that would supply the recycled water and hold it over. Well, that had to be passed on to the recycled customers, and it would be impossible for not impossible, but it would be so cost ineffective that it would be disastrous to most of the program. So anyway, yeah, you're right on target about the, you know, it come back to bite us in a way, you know.
All right, Director Day.
Yeah, I agree with Director Dwyer, and I do, unfortunately, I think we're too far down the road, but in a lot of other communities where they are using recycled water more and more, it is being used that way, where it's much more manageable. Because storage, obviously, is the big issue. I know we're digressing here, but you can't do much about that. But I love the whole recycle idea, love the recycle program. We just didn't close the loop back when, and now it's, you know, costs 100 times more, and we may never be able to close it. So anyhow,
Unless we could
different
increase
thoughts.
Increase the capacity of it, but that's expensive, at least at this point.
I think one clarification question, Ellen, as we're talking about the different rates, you mentioned that maybe the recycled water rates are too low. You're not proposing that they be equal to potable rates because of the inferior product?
No, I don't think that would be practical, but I think we
least,
need to
yeah,
account for the supplementation and such.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
that's great. One last slide. I'll put you on the spot. Discussion is about drought rates. So as we know, drought rates are temporary rates to address shortfall in revenue. We're highly dependent on the commodity side of the house for our revenues. And droughts will occur in California, whether they're regulatory or whether they're specific to your situations. We all know
political drought.
that that's going to happen. So the question is how do we address that instability? How do we address that risk? And so there's three ways, and none of these are, there's pros and cons with all three of them. So one is drought rates. You've had them in the past. You never, my understanding, implemented them. As you know, the challenge is we're asking customers to cut back, and the rates increase, and they go higher. So that's as we all know, that's a very tough message to sell. We've seen a lot of news articles about that. The second one is that we can increase the fixed charge, and you did give us some directions about that, and that could help with revenue stability, but then the challenge is affordability. And the third one is reserves. We could have a special reserve, a rate stabilization fund, and I'll be turning over to Greg, and he'll be talking about reserves in a second, and Jamie. But we could have a reserve just dedicated for that. So it's, in some sense, mentally, it's very similar to a drought rate, but in the sense that you're paying it now. So we're asking people to pay for this potential drought to occur now, you build up a reserve. When the drought hits, then we draw down on it.
Doesn't that fly in the face of 218 with what a reasonable reserve is? Or is that explainable?
That's explainable. A lot of agencies have we call it a rate stabilization fund.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard of a court case that has upheld that.
Yet.
Yeah, but the yet is true with anything, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's like,
Yeah, exactly.
just give enough, who knows what will happen in the future. But right, what we do know is what's happening right now, which is rate stabilization funds are justifiable.
But
and are recommended.
in our local newspaper, the Mountain Democrat, and on next door, the computerized thing, there was a lot of questions during the last year about a drought rate. Are we going to impose a drought rate? And people asked me about it, and I said, I don't think the board intends to do that.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with you in that third component. Maybe you put a little extra money into the pot in case all of a sudden it goes away, because it's not as obvious and it's sustainable. You know?
I think as an observation, that might be necessary in other districts, but if you step back and look at our situation, the water rights that we have, the reserves that we have, I don't see us having the need, because we have enough water in storage and in our system to get us through several droughts. So why would we do this? Why would we penalize our customers to put some funds into a drought fund that, according to all our projections, we won't need, because we'll have enough water to sell? If your other agencies that don't have enough water rights and storage and all the things that we have because of the planning and the forethought of staff and board in the past, we're pretty well positioned. Matter of fact, it was a little difficult for us to go out and say to our customers, please conserve 15% when we had sufficient water.
Exactly.
So I kind of would not be in favor of any of those solutions.
Director Day?
Yeah, so we had a real-life experience with the drought 2014, 15, 16. We had a healthy debate back then about drought rates, because we had it in our plan. And we all were able to come to conclusion to not do it, to put faith in our customers, and our customers rewarded us by doing the right things and conserving when we really did need conservation. Although we didn't need the 28% conservation that the state mandated on us, we would have been fine at 10 or something like that, because we do have ample water reserves and stuff. I understand the financial issue. I'd be curious to know during that drought what the impact was on our revenues, because I know that's what you're looking at addressing. But I certainly am not in favor of the punitive drought rates. I don't agree with the reserves. I agree with you, Pat, on that. You know, I admit to being a little tempted, not regarding drought shortfalls, but just in general, that a lot of our infrastructure, a lot of our expenses are fixed. And how much extra water people use in the summer is not a huge impact on our bottom line costs. So I remember when we went from the, was it the 2/3, 1/3 to 50/50?
Yeah, it was 30% fixed and 70% variable rates, and staff recommended and the board adopted about a 50/50 split. So it sheltered us a little bit from the variability of customers reducing their demand. And I would strongly encourage that we, keep it in that range.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it was one of the better things we've done from a revenue stability standpoint. And again, if we even needed to tweak it up a little bit, I think we could discuss that. Right.
Yep, Director Dwyer?
And I think maybe a potential solution would be, the board always has the ability to impose an emergency action. So rather than building this into the rates now and developing a reserve or any of these options, if the need arose that there was a 5-year drought, the board could look at it and say, oops, our revenues are down, we can't keep operating, we're going to impose a 10% surcharge. And so I'd leave it as a situational thing as opposed to building it in.
President Verkamp, if I could just, great thought. Just for the purposes of discussion, just a reminder that that any change to the district's rate, even if it were done by emergency action, would have to be justified by an analysis showing that the change would not result in the district recovering more revenue than is required to serve the parcel. We typically do that through a rate study. So, it would be difficult for us to move quickly on an emergency basis to change revenues, because we would have to do essentially a rate analysis to justify it. And then secondly, of course, we would also have to comply with the notice requirements associated with Prop 218 in the public hearing. So just want to, plant that seed that, now is the best time for us to make decisions about what our revenues are going to be for the period of
Rely
this
on
rate
trying to
analysis.
declare the emergency.
I just question, is it legal, so to speak, to build in to the rate structure a component that says, given these circumstances, can we impose a drought rate increase and build it into the 218 notice? Is that applicable?
Yeah, so you have a supply contingency plan developed in your urban water management plan. It has 6 stages associated with it. We could actually have drought rates for each stage. So the way this would work is that hopefully you never have this scenario. But this is, the thing I think we all acknowledge is that there's more uncertainty in the world than ever, right? And unfortunately, I think the certainties will increase. So we're certain there's more uncertainty. So the challenge here is that the board may declare a stage 3 drought, for instance, and then the board could decide to implement the stage 3 droughts, or they could actually implement something lower, like a stage 2 or stage 1, based on the financial condition. But you have that flexibility.
So to me, that makes sense, but I'm still a little reluctant to go there, given the resource and our rights. Now, legislation changes, which we're up against now, I think all bets are off, and who the heck knows? So I think timing is good that we're having this conversation, and at least it sounds like there may be a little bit of an opening to try to do that. But what I'm hearing right now is we're not gonna go there, but let's keep that in mind as we develop this process moving forward, given legislation and what may occur.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would want to see more proof about what our revenue issues were during the previous drought in order to justify that, because again, we're adding more complexity.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
And the Prop 218, sorry to interrupt you, but the Prop 218 notice will look ugly. I mean, that's the one
Right.
thing about this thing is that,
Right.
because we're gonna have 6 stages, you know, to talk about confusion, so that's why I do a lot of drought rate analysis. I've written articles, I've spoken books. Actually, I'm a part of AWW, American Water Works Association Rates and Charges, and writing the section on drought rates. So, I've done a lot of work in here. To me, just based on your circumstances, that's why I'm suggesting the reserve as a way to weather a storm, because I suspect you won't have a drought that will last 5 years. I suspect if you had a drought, and that could be a regulatory drought, it would be a 1 year or 2 year thing, and it would be a 20% cutback in revenue, 20% on sales, which then is, if it's 45%, then it's,
right.
you don't need that much.
Well, again, a kind of counterpoint, again, our situation, our infrastructure, that we at least can have forecasted that we can weather a 5-year drought and be okay, not only in supplying our customers, but also the revenue stream. And if we have that 5-year window, and it looks like we're in the 3rd year of a very serious drought, we could reconvene, have a 218 and do it. It's gonna take us, less than a year to do this study. So let's just do another study in the future.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just sort of head in that direction.
Okay.
I mean, we'll be in the middle of this process. If we see something legislatively, we have to maybe do a little bit of a cover our base, then we'll go there. Yeah.
But, I mean, you did give me clear direction, which is, what's the financial risk of a drought?
Right.
And so we're developing the financial model. We'll be looking at increasing the fixed charge slightly, and we'll understand that risk, I think.
Yes, Director Osborne.
My only concern with that idea and process is that if in fact we were to have another catastrophic wildfire and take the flume out, we lose a third of our water supply, and the time frame in order to get that 218 notice, it takes a while to do that. And we could be, if in a fire, now we go back in the 1500, I wasn't around, contrary to, but,
But you were.
yeah, but there's 15-year droughts.
Yeah.
And, it's potentially possible, and, of course, they didn't have the Indians didn't have the infrastructure that we have, but.
You were here with the Ice Age.
But the point is, if we were to lose a third of our water supply, we lost it last year, and we were able to get by because we had storage in Sly Park, but if, again, it would seem to be cumbersome to have to get a 218 notice out in a timely fashion if we were to lose that flume in May. And having been an old wildland firefighter, we've had years where we could lose it in May.
But isn't that the reason for maybe points of diversion changes and being able to get the water out of there without?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you can't.
just some comments on that. Yes, we were fortunate to get it back in service. Yes, it cost us a lot of money. Yes, it came out of our reserves, because you won't get FEMA monies for years. Insurance was a little better. I think Sanjay's suggestion is that we look at our level of reserves, whether it's just for drought or kind of emergencies in total may be appropriate. There's some comments coming up that I'll make regarding our levels of reserves versus what Moody's recommends for agency of our size and our financial ability at an A+ rating, and we're below that. Well below. So maybe if we could, again, look at the fixed charges, 50/50 or slightly ticked up a little bit, and then let us take a look at the reserves, how we can manage that, not necessarily just for drought, but emergencies in total, because we did spend a lot of money out of reserves, and that concerns me.
Not sure what the category may be, but we have seen instances in the past, one way or the other, that could cause issue, so.
Yeah.
Director Day.
Just while we're on the reserves, I just would urge caution on that. Because our reserves, we went from just overall reserve, 1.0, 1.25 on our formulas. Now we're at 2.0, 2.25, so on, is that we just be cautious about that, so.
Yeah, that slide's coming up, but
Sorry.
when we established that reserve back in 2009 and 10, we weren't making bare minimum 1.0 coverage. And it was the way to slowly increase the rates to be able to have some cushion there. When we have it come up in the next slide, actually, Moody's recommends, or at least analyzes what, again, our rating should be and what coverage we should have. And I think it's a good point to have some discussion on.
So that's what we're going to talk about next. I'm going to sort of, I get the sense that we need to maybe up the pace of the presentation. I have no problem being here all day, but I love this stuff. But
No, we do, so
but I
keep
know
moving.
but I know some of you have other bigger issues to deal with. So reserves are important. First is to determine financial health. How do you determine that? And there's two things, and we've talked about that. One is reserves, and the second is coverage ratio, and that's your debt obligation. Reserves are needed for a couple of reasons. One is cash flow. You have expenses, and sometimes these cash flow capital projects are significant. You have to spend money really quickly. The other one is because of risk, and we're going to go into both of them. And then reserve coverage ratio is, as I mentioned, is this obligation between debt and income. S&P, you're currently A+ with S&P Global Rating and A1 with Moody. More healthy reserves you have, better it is for a credit rating.
And just a side note, for a median agency at an A+ rating, Moody's indicating the median is 2.44, which is much higher than what we have.
So let's go into the different types of reserves that we have out there. There are a couple of different types that you could have. We can go to the next slide. So we have the operating reserves. So operating, as I mentioned, is a cash flow, 3 months of operating. This is your current reserve policy. Capital reserves, you have a prior year of depreciation. That's good, because when you award a contract, you need to have that money in place. Routine capital replacement reserve, that's the prior year depreciation. Self-insurance reserve, $1 million, and an unfunded accrual pension liability reserve to reduce unfunded liability. So what are some suggestions that Greg and we looked at and we thought about? One is the capital replacement reserve. Right now, it's based on depreciation, prior year depreciation. That's old dollars. As we know, inflationary costs has been increased recently. So what we would suggest is to do it based on a 3 to 5 year average of full capital expenditure that's happening out. And so that gives you the money in place so that you can start awarding those contracts and you have it. Second one is an emergency reserves to deal with fire and storm drain issues. As we all know, FEMA will one day reimburse us, but they don't cash flow the problem. So we need to have something in place for that. The emergency reserves is a bit of a challenge, I'll be admit, in the sense of how much we should have, right? We did have a fire, so we have one good data point that we could use from that. But we're working with staff to determine what is the appropriate emergency reserve level to have to deal with that cash flow situation. Hopefully, again, it's a kind of, you have it set aside, hopefully it never occurs, but if it does. Then a rate stabilization, which we've talked about quite a bit, is to have in case of a drought condition. And in this example here, it would be 1 year of commodity revenue, for instance, or it could be a percentage of the commodity revenue. But the idea is that if you had a 1 year of commodity revenue and it's a 20% cutback, you know, that, you have multiple years you can use that to draw down on. So you don't have this problem, and then it simplifies.
Oh, I think, look, I have to keep an open mind and as we delve into this, and then we'll look at more data to see what is supported and what's not. Pat, did you have any? Okay, go ahead.
Well, okay, so the coverage ratios. Okay. So as Jim mentioned, the coverage ratio is really critical to issuing new debt. So, you know, this kind of depends on where you want to be. A lot of places now even struggle to keep the minimum. The higher you can get that. I was a little shocked that the 2.44 was Moody's. Like that's, I think they made some mistakes in the past and now they're kind of trying to be a little more conservative. So all of this kind of, you know, rolls in together with all your reserve requirements and how you want to set those. You know, in the bigger picture, when you tie in rate design, there are agencies that basically set their fixed charges to recover all of their fixed costs and their variable rates to cover all the variable costs. And I've had finance directors tell me, we don't care how much water we sell or don't sell. We always have the right amount of revenue. Because if, you know, our water sales get cut in half, our costs get cut in half, and we're always covering our fixed charges. That's, you know, that's quite a different scenario than the state has always pushed to have at least 70% volumetric rates. I live in the city of Davis, and at one point, several years ago, I was on the Utility Rate Advisory Committee for that community, and they wanted to adopt 100% volumetric rates. And there were dire consequences to that. The school districts talked about drilling their own wells, and you know they saw this rate spiral where everybody was going, oh my gosh, you know, I mean, if nobody covers fixed costs, I'm just gonna, you know, get off their system. And they actually adopted an 87% volumetric and 13% fixed as they were kind of held hostage by a group, an environmental group that was threatening to sue them over their wastewater treatment plants. Very complicated, but most of the public, after they heard about the 13%, they were up in arms and they wanted to go back to something more like 60-40, 70-30. So anyway.
Director Osborne?
Now, just one overarching issue. Going back a few years, our bond rating was significantly lower, C plus, B minus. When we have to go out, and we do have to go out and borrow money, we need in every aspect to protect that A minus rating for the size of our district, because it is a huge difference in interest rates. And it's hard to explain that to people, but if we don't protect that A minus rating, it has serious consequences. So just in the back of your pea brain, you know, when you're working on this thing, you know, you need to, you know, it's a tough thing to do, to balance the affordability, excuse me, and maintaining that A rating.
Yeah, particularly when you're planning to issue new debt at some time in the next couple years. There are times when rate increases are actually controlled by the coverage calculation itself. You know, so as much as, so there are tricks. I mean, I've done a lot of bond issuance, you know, bond feasibility studies where you work with the finance team and the different attorneys that do that kind of stuff. And so there's different things you can do in your financials to increase that coverage ratio, but they're very concerned about having enough cash to keep that coverage ratio up. So yeah, I mean, imagine the scenario where you can get by on 6%, but you have to do 9% increases just to meet the coverage, you know, to keep you from going too low, because you're going to have to issue new debt. To be honest with you, there are places that They have no need to issue new debt for at least another 5 years. They're missing their coverage. They're having a rate study. They've missed it for 2 years. The trustees really, don't, it's not like somebody's going to jail for that. They kind of slap them on the wrist and say, you really should be doing this. We're doing a rate study and we're going to get it up. But yeah, it's an important issue.
I obviously overspoke. You guys don't have pea brains. You're very intelligent guys, so.
I didn't think you were talking about us.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We might identify with that, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, but I just think that needs to be paramount in this rate structure, that we protect that rate.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other comment? Nope. All right. Direction then, it sounds like to me, is maintaining that 1.7 to 2, or. I'm sorry, we should sit up, huh? Yeah, maintaining that 1.7 to 2 at least, and then protecting the ratings.
Well, just before we move on that, at least that would be kind of the minimum.
Yes.
And then we'd play around with some of the recommendations they had on potential modifications to the reserve policy to see what that does to the affordability stuff.
Yeah. I think most people at least understand prudent planning, and having those reserves is prudent, because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd say the reserve policy, this is going to be kind of a comprehensive package, what the rate design is, how big the rate increases are going to be, and all the reserve policies. That, it kind of all works together. So we're going to be coming with something that, works overall. And we'll, work with staff, obviously, and come up with a recommendation we think is a good fit from what we've heard. So the next steps, it was great to get feedback from you all today. So we're in the point now, we're finalizing the data collection, and we're going to start really crunching numbers and coming up with some of the cost service analysis for the 3 areas: drinking water, wastewater, and recycled water. So we plan to come back midsummer with some results. And, a key part of that is going to be customer impacts, customer bill impacts. So, we're actually going to set up a dashboard where we can look at different policies and different rate designs and then show you comparison side by side. This one has this impact on these kinds of customers, and this one has this kind of impact. So you'll be able to see more interactively like what the impacts are. So with that, did you want to go over the schedule? Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Greg. So again, thank you for the dialogue today. Really, I just kind of wanted to show the schedule one last time and just kind of let everybody know that the project does remain on schedule. So if there are any other questions or discussions at this time, if not, that will complete our presentation.
We're good? All right. Certainly ask the public if they'd like to weigh in. Anybody in the room? Nope. Online, Jen.
If members of the public would like to address the board on workshop item number 6, the cost service analysis workshop, now is the time. Please refer to page 2 for the instructions of today's agenda. However, I just want to go over, in case people don't have the agenda handy, if you are participating via phone, you just press the *9 button on your phone, and it'll raise your hand on this end, and then we'll unmute you. So it's that *9 button. If you would like to, well, actually, I can say with confidence there are no members of the public wishing to speak because the one person that was there hung up.
Okay.
So,
Must have got his question answered, hopefully.
no.
All right, well, very good. Well, we thank you, Jamie. Thank you to our consultants. Very good dialogue. Hopefully you got what you need okay. Does anybody need a couple-minute break, or we'll just take a? Yeah, okay, let's just take a couple-minute break. Came back from our short break. We're ready to go with our next workshop item from Elizabeth. Officer.
Actually, it is action item number 7.
action item, I'm sorry.
We will be taking action
you're
on
right.
this item.
Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning, President Veerkamp and members of the board. Elizabeth Leeper, Senior Deputy General Counsel for the district. And I will be introducing this item this morning, which is to consider updated positions on proposed state legislation. So as you may recall, we were actually here in March to present the recommended positions on 21 legislative bills at that time. And the district is very active in the legislative front. I think this is a good segue into, from the presentation that you just heard, which is another source of unpredictability and potential costs, which is always what is occurring on the legal and regulatory front. So for decades, the district has prioritized being active in the state legislative front. And so, as you know, since March, the legislature has continued to be active, and frequently bills are amended, changed, introduced since the time that we last spoke with you. So in cooperation with our state legislative advocate, which is REEB Government Relations, we have identified additional bills that we would like the board to consider official positions on. So I'm going to be turning it over to Bob Reeb, and he can give you some more detail about the bills that we're looking at.
Good morning, Mr. President and board members. Bob Reeb with Reeb Government Relations. A pleasure to be here with you today. We've been working on a lot of different bills, and as the board understands, once the introduction deadline passes in mid-February, legislation gets amended, and it gets amended sometimes multiple times. We track those. We have a legislative tracking system with an email alert that anytime anything happens on a bill of interest to the district, we get notified. And at times we will have conversations with district staff if the amendments may trigger a different change in position. And these bills kind of hit that threshold this year thus far. So the first one is AB 480. This is another in a series of surplus land bills that the legislature's been working on, triggered really by the need to build more affordable housing in California. And one way to do that is to get free land. Not free, but it's surplus, and the cost to acquire is often much less for local housing agencies. The challenge with some of these bills is that they have, and laws, is that they now have very prescriptive outreach, communication, board workshops that are required before you sell or dispose of surplus land. This particular bill, we're seeking an amendment. It's an opportunity. It's not a bill that really directly affects the district, but because it deals with exempt surplus land, we're seeking this opportunity to get an amendment that adds to a category of exemptions from these public outreach and transparency requirements for land that is not ever going to be developed. Something that may be up near the national forest or 20 miles away outside the urban limit lines that won't be developed in the next 20 years. We'd like to be able to allow that to be sold without going through the surplus land process to determine whether it's appropriate for housing. You're not going to be building housing in the middle of the national forest. So that's the amendment we're looking at there. AB 676 is a bill by Assembly Member Steve Bennett, and yes.
Who determines, by this legislation, who determines whether it's surplus property or not? Is it?
District Governing Board.
Okay, that's good, okay.
Yeah. 676 is, right now we have a general state policy in section 106 of the Water Code that says domestic water use has the highest priority and irrigation is the second. It's been in statute since 1943. Assembly Member Bennett decided that he wanted to put a little more detail in that, in particular in the domestic provisions of the policy statement. And he started adding things that were in the California Code of Regulations and a few other things. And of course, whenever you take something very simple that says domestic use is first, and you try to identify all the things that are domestic use, maybe you leave out something, maybe you know, include something you don't intend. And so we've been working through Aqua with Assemblymember Bennett's office to try and narrow this bill so that it simply reflects that which is currently in the Code of Regulations. He's got a phrase in here, including but not limited to. We don't like that when it can create confusion or uncertainty for the public water system. And so we're still working on this through Aqua and the California Municipal Utilities Association. We're recommending a not favor unless amended, really to tighten that up. The bill, I think most in the water community have the belief that this bill is not necessary, but as long as it doesn't cause harm in the means of confusion, litigation risk, and things like that, then we think it would be okay if we got that clarified. AB 754 by Assemblymember Pappen, Diane Pappen. This is a bill that takes a deeper dive into the water shortage contingency analysis and the drought planning that is required currently under your Urban Water Management Planning Act. Under existing law, you have to look at all sources of water. You have to look at what happens in a drought. You have to, in your contingency plan analysis, you have to look at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% shortages. And you have to identify in your plan what your response will be based on those levels of shortage. This bill proposes to go even into a deeper dive in your planning document to look at surface storage when it is 50% or more of your supply. But then it gets very complicated, unnecessarily so, and it potentially will drive decision-making on conservation, for example. If a reservoir is normally operated based on snowmelt, and so you draw it down in February, March, April, that could actually, in this legislation, trigger a conservation response on behalf of a public water system or its customers, even though we know that reservoir is going to fill and maybe even spill, and you won't have to conserve water in the summer months or in the fall. So it drives a lot, the level of detail that the author is seeking drives a lot of perverse reactions on the part of a public water system. Association of California Water Agencies and the California Municipal Utilities Association has really been taking the lead on this bill, but it's in the second house. So we think it makes sense for us to actively oppose the bill, for us to get engaged and certainly communicate the position to Senator Alvarado Gill, who, if this bill gets all the way to the Senate floor, would be having the first opportunity to cast a vote on AB 754. AB 1484, this is a bill that actually was highlighted to us by your Human Resources Department. And as it has been amended, it would essentially treat temporary public employees the same as your permanent employees for purposes of union representation and benefits that are negotiated with your employees association. So a temporary public employee would have much of the same protections, procedural and otherwise, that your permanent employees have.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
When they say temporary, how long of a term, when a temporary employee is hired, how long before they become permanent?
Well, they wouldn't become permanent unless the district, the employer made the decision
There are
to
no
do that.
caps, like limited term laws?
I don't know if there's
I
anything.
thought there was 6 months to 2 years, limited term.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if the
Yeah,
general counsel.
it's something I'm familiar with because that was topics of debate 45 years ago. But limited term temporary employees is acceptable in order to bring them in to fill the gaps where you don't have staffing, but it's only supposed to be temporary as long as the project is alive. So is it project-orientated when it becomes or not?
And I'm sorry, is the question, how long can an employee remain temporary?
Temporary, yes.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head what that is, Director Anzini. But as it relates to the district regularly employs summertime workers at Sly Park, and things of this nature.
But
So
that's a seasonal worker.
this is really the kind of employee that this legislation would apply to, and for which the district has concerns which it's shared with the advocate.
So it basically seasonal workers.
Yeah, it's, as I understand, it's flume, and when you're in there doing flume work.
Well, that's different.
No, when
Seasonal,
it- like a-
recreational, my biggest concerns are whether seasonal versus project-oriented temporary workers, which is acceptable. But, as long as a project lasts, but if after a 2-year period, if it becomes something more permanent, then that employee should.
Right, so that would be the decision of the governing body as to how to treat the temporary versus a permanent employee in that timeframe.
But
This
I thought there
bill
were
takes
laws
it
on that
away.
one.
Maybe if Jose could kind
Yeah.
of tell us how this might affect.
I'm not just talking EID,
yeah.
I'm talking state
Yes.
laws.
Yes, good morning. Good point, Director Anzini. I think the question relates to CalPERS and limited term. And yes, there are certain rules as far as the limited terms with CalPERS. In essence, the term can be 6 months, it can be 2 years, as you said, as it relates to CalPERS. The issue with this assembly bill is that there's a lot of open legal questions. What is a temporary employee? Is it governed by CalPERS? Temporary employee, based on my understanding of the reading of this assembly bill, brings everybody in, from seasonals to limited terms. CalPERS doesn't answer the question as far as union representation, and so we have limited terms here at the district that have lasted 6 months. We've had other limited terms that have lasted a lot longer. For example, our Hanson upgrade project. Those folks have been here at least 18 months. This bill talks to the question about union representation, and there's a lot of union representation issues that go with full-time permanent employees that have not historically gone to temporary employees, whether seasonal, 60-day employees, or limited-term employees. And so the issue becomes, is there a vested property interest in the continuation of employment beyond the limited-term assignment, subject to the employer's decision of how long that limited-term assignment is? And that's one among other issues that should be clarified by this assembly bill, as far as my understanding.
Okay, so, but should be addressed. We're just coming out with an oppose, and those answers aren't happy. I mean, I don't see that. That isn't what I see. What I see is a limitation of somebody joining an organization, which is entirely their prerogative. And what I see capped on this whole thing is opposition to union membership. And I have a problem with that. But I'm not through yet.
I know, I just raised my hand.
I'm not through yet. But what is really important is when you put everything into CalPERS, not all public agencies are in CalPERS. There's county agencies that are in their own retirement systems. East Bay Mud is their own retirement system, and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power have their own. So I don't see it as a pension issue. I see it more as a union issue.
And I'm not, I'm not too familiar with the author's intent. I understand it's authored by a union. The issue, it becomes, if you hire a limited-term employee and the term is 6 months, will this assembly bill allowing them to become union members then trigger other obligations on employers before saying we could end that term? Do you have to go through a meet and confer layoff procedure? Even though you knew full well
If our
that,
policy is set up to do that.
but they're temps, and that goes to
I
the
understand.
issue of the bill. So
Yeah.
probably much cleanup has to happen before folks really understand
Right.
the true impacts of this bill.
No, we can get into my own personal arguments on that whole thing, but when it all boils down to it, we're opposing a situation that doesn't if our policy is very clear when we hire, why are we opposing something that doesn't impact us? If we're already capped or put our Ts and dotted our Is.
Good questions, thank you.
Director Day?
Yeah, but it may affect us because we hire temp employees through a temp agency. We do the seasonal employees. And it sounds like, the way this is currently written, that they would instantly, we would have to treat them as though they were permanent, full-time employees. And that whole defeats the whole purpose of using seasonal employees and temp employees. And, you know, I've used a temp agency from time to time. They cover the employees' workers' comp, they cover the employees, all the issues with the work. And then suddenly then it becomes a gray area that we're supposed to cover that and PTO and all this. I don't know. So I understand where you're coming from. We need maybe more information on this. But I don't think it's a big issue right now. I think temp employment is a useful thing, both for the employees and employers.
If I could just make one comment, President Bierkamp, sorry to jump in here, but President Zini, I want to make sure that we directly address your concern, which is the district is not opposed to union membership. And we will make that very, very clear in our communications. The district supports its associations and membership in its associations. Our opposition to this bill is triggered by the uncertainties that it will create and the potential costs that it will create for the district to be able to extend certain protections to temporary, mostly seasonal employees. I just want to make it clear that you know, if the board adopts this opposed position, we will make it very clear in our communications that the district is not opposed to union membership. That is not what we're communicating when we communicate and oppose on this particular bill.
Yes, and before we move on, if I could just add to that, I think our primary concern, as Brian indicated, so there's, I think, two primary concerns. One is uncertainty in terms of, as we all know, sometimes the law looks very simple on its face, right? So if this law says temporary public employees will enjoy the same benefits of union membership as permanent employees. Sounds fairly simple. I think some of our concern is, what does that look like in practice, right? So in terms of process, if we hire a bunch of seasonal employees in the summer, what does that look like in terms of process? Do they step into the shoes of permanent employees? Is there an additional meet and confer process that's associated with that hiring? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what this would look like. I think the other concern is affordability and flexibility to hire temporary staff. So as you know, sometimes our needs are fairly predictable. Maybe we need summer employees every summer. Some of our needs actually can pop up fairly quickly. And so I think having that flexibility and affordability with the temporary hire, where we still have that ability to pivot and keep those costs relatively low to our customers. So I think those were the two areas we were concerned about. But to Brian's point, we obviously continue to support union membership. It's more just that there are consequences in terms of cost and process when you expand those benefits. And I'm going to turn it back over to Bob.
Yes.
Moving on to an easier bill. And if there are amendments that staff believes could remove opposition, then it would be appropriate to consider an oppose unless amended position. We needed to
You
narrow
mean
that.
on AB 1484?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I
I
went
have
backward.
no problem with that if it's amended, but to be just outright opposed to it and not have the answers I have asked, I would rather not. So go ahead, you can move to the next one.
Thank you. SB 366 is sponsored by the California Municipal Utilities Association, and it seeks to mimic, if you will, other long-term targets that the state has adopted, whether it's electric vehicle, clean air, different things like that. This bill would require the California Water Plan, which is updated by the Department of Water Resources every 5 years, to include long-term supply targets that the sponsor hopes will lead to an advisory committee working with the Department of Water Resources to look at planning in terms of, if you set a target, then you have something to measure against as you move forward. Aqua supports this bill. CMUA is the sponsor. We're recommending a favor position. This was a spot bill when we were before you in March, and now it has substantive provisions, and it's in the Assembly now. SB 470 by Senator Alvarado Gill. This is built off of an urban water community drought relief program that provides distribution system grant funding for those public water systems and community water systems in high fire hazard and very high fire hazard severity zones. We, because of El Dorado Irrigation's district's reliance significantly on the wooden flumes related to Project 184 and up here, we're going to, and we have spoken with her staff and sent a letter to request an amendment to expand the eligibility to include transmission portions of a public water system. In other words, that which occurs between the source and the drinking water treatment plant. This bill has passed the Senate. It's in the Assembly. One of the challenges she has that was raised by the Senate Appropriations Committee is that the current funding for that urban water community drought relief program has been exhausted. So she will likely have to identify a new source, and we've recommended that she try and get this program added into SB 867, which is Senator Allen's climate resilience bond, so that there would be a new source of funding through which to provide grants to public water systems. So we're working with her legislative director, Mr. Sharif. The bill hasn't been set for hearing yet in the Assembly, so we're hoping to kind of get closure on the amendment to that bill. Very quickly, status of the state budget, it's a mess. The Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office are projecting a deficit in the general fund somewhere between $27 and $31.5 billion by June 30 of 2024. Because of that, the governor has recommended the legislature to reduce or eliminate all of the climate resilience general fund appropriations over the last couple of years when the state was in surplus, and to move all of that to the climate resilience bond. That there seems to be the legislature and the governor coalescing around putting a climate resilience bond on the ballot either in March or November of next year. And we're talking about and I'll jump to the bond measures, but the state budget, the legislature has to approve a balanced budget by this Thursday, the 15th at midnight. By constitutional requirement, we should see a budget bill in print sometime today. If they do, it's going to be like pulling the rabbit out of the hat because they have had no budget committee hearings. They're not going to have a budget conference committee, which is the kind of the open and transparent process in the past when the Assembly and the Senate adopted their own budgets and they worked out the differences in conference committee. There's some significant differences between the Democratic legislative leadership and the governor on how to address the budget deficit. The Senate, for example, wants to expend about 1/2 of the, what I call the rainy day fund. They want to spend about $19 billion of that reserve in order to reduce the impacts of cuts and extensions of putting off programmatic expenditures. So what will happen is there'll be a budget approved this Thursday. It will have blocks of funding that will say it depends on future legislation. There will be additional conversations between the governor and the legislative leadership between now and June the 27th. We'll have the real budget that will go back to the legislature that should reflect a negotiated settlement between the governor and the legislators, but they're not going to get to every little thing. So it's going to be another summer where they'll be doing budget bills and budget trailer bills and budget bill juniors through September the 14th. It's not so much of an issue for water districts, but when you're a city or county that's relying on homeless funding and health and human services funding at the county level, it can be a real challenge to be moving into a fiscal year on July 1 without knowing the state of the state budget for your particular programs. Bond measures. So as I mentioned, there's going to be likely a climate resilience bond on the ballot next year. Right now, the Senate and the Assembly have their own versions of a climate resilience bond. They're in the $15 billion neighborhood. There's also 2 flood control bonds or flood protection bonds. One's about $4 to $5 billion, and the Senate version is $6 billion. The thinking is that they're going to take the flood bonds and the climate resilience bonds and put them together. Right now, they're going to try and get that done and put on the ballot in March. I'm not sure they will be able to do so. The issue I see with the bond measure, this climate resilience bond, is they're like a mile wide on programs and projects and about an inch deep in funding. And so, for example, a Water Reuse Association of California chapter that the district's a member of is asking for $1.8 billion in funding for water recycling, advanced water treatment, brackish water desalting, and what have you. Both of these bond measures have about $300 million for that now. There's a Dam Safety Coalition that the district is a member of that I've been working with all year. They've identified a need for a new program at the state level, 50% state funding, 50% local funding. And based on the current projects, they believe about $850 million is necessary for a dam safety program. Right now, there's about half of that in one of the bonds. So when you look at trying to fund conservancies and land acquisitions and heat island mitigation and urban cooling centers and fisheries restoration, and you stack that up against your traditional water recycling or water infrastructure type funding, you get to the situation where you've got a huge bond, but it's probably only going to fund programs for a few years. And that's a bad place for the state to be in because they can't be issuing $15 billion every 4 years. So there's a lot of angst among some of the Republican members, and you hear it in committee hearings where they're voting against these measures because they say when we had a $97 billion surplus, we should have put more into infrastructure on a pay-as-you-go basis. But the water's out behind the dam on that one, so we're looking at these bond measures right now. District has a support amend on all of these. We've been communicating the priorities. In fact, General Manager Abercrombie and Ms. Leeper and I met with Senator Alvarado Gil's legislative director about 6 weeks ago and talked about the flumes and different investment needs. Quickly back on the state budget, we did bring forward requests to Assemblymember Megan Daly, Assemblymember Joe Patterson, and Senator Alvarado Gil. This year, we kind of, before we knew, this is before May revision, we knew the budget was going to be in even worse shape. But before that, we brought forward requests. Legislators get a certain number of requests depending on the budget situation in any given year. And so they can bring forward anywhere between 3 to 5 district requests that would then get general fund money. And so it's a different way for us to try and get you grant funding to relieve the pressure on your CIP and the ratepayers in the district, like me. And so we brought forward flume funding, replacement funding to Senator Alvarado Gil. The covering, the reservoir covers that you're looking at in your CIP or through federal funding, we brought that forward to Assemblymember Megan Daly. And we, working with your staff, identified the penstock improvement work for Project 184. And we brought that forward to Assemblymember Patterson. Those have been kind of put into their priority list and taken forward to the budget committees. We won't know until we see a bill in print where we are, but what we don't get in through the state budget, we're going to make sure that we advocate through your delegation to get those programs included in the climate resilience bond, so you have an opportunity to compete with other districts after hopefully the voters approve that measure. Any questions before I turn it back? Yes.
Director Osborne.
There's a little cloud hanging out here, and nobody knows exactly when it's going to rain or if it's going to rain. But if we have an economic slowdown, the way the tax structure of the state is that 1% pays a huge percentage of the state's budget. And if all of a sudden either of those, we have an economic turn, are you hearing anybody talking about that?
Yes. Yeah, the Legislative Analyst's Office that works with the legislature from their perspective on the state budget, not only this year, but in out years. And then the Department of Finance, of course, advises the governor. Both have indicated ranges of what ifs over the next 5 years. And they are projecting, even with a moderate recession, that the state general fund budget will be in a structural deficit through 2025, 2026. If the bottom falls out, which no one's really predicting right now, but you never know if, the war in Ukraine, Russia spills over, or China does something, or, who knows what. Those are built in, and that's why the governor's trying to hold on to the rainy day fund, the $38 billion there. He doesn't want to spend it all, or at least half of it this year, because of where the Legislative Analyst's Office, Department of Finance are projecting where the general fund deficits are going to be in the out years. But yeah, there's the top 5% of taxpayers in California provide about 50% of the state budget. And a lot of that is capital gains revenue. So when the stock market is in a decline, the revenues are in decline.
Winners.
Yeah.
Lottery.
Lottery winners, that's what, yeah. I haven't won that yet, so.
You have to buy a ticket, Bob.
Oh,
That's true.
Damn. All right, any other questions?
President Veerkamp, if I could just ask a question. Before the board goes to vote on the recommended positions, Bob, just a clarification. You indicated, the staff report that you just gave recommends an oppose on 1484, but you indicated that the board could take an oppose if amended position. Is that your modified recommendation, or?
So when we present positions like this to you, you can change any of those if you want.
Well, I will make a motion.
Oh, okay, not yet. Let's finish the presentation. We can make a motion. And I was gonna say that after public comment, you can change any of these items. It would be option 2, take other direction as directed by the board, or you can vote on items separately. It's up to you. You're the board. This is just the recommendation.
Okay, so I think, Elizabeth, you want to finish?
Yeah,
the
so
item,
let's
and then
close it out before, and take public comment.
before we make
Well,
a motion.
actually,
We go
it
either
would
way.
be a first and a second before public comment.
Elizabeth.
She's making a presentation.
Let's,
Just to wrap things up. So option 1 is to approve the recommendations of Reeb Government Relations LLC as the district's official positions on proposed state legislation. As always, there's also the option to take other action as directed by the board. We are currently recommending option 1, which is the recommendations as presented.
Right. Director Anzini, I believe you're.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the recommendation with the exception of AB 1484, that we amend rather than go against it and oppose it.
Oppose unless.
I don't care. Oppose
do it,
with amendment.
so is there a second?
Is there a second? Second, I'll second. All right, thank you, Director Day.
And then if I could just seek clarification, typically we would seek guidance in this instance on the amendments that we would be seeking. I believe, at least my opinion and that of the Human Resources Director, was there are instances where we feel that bills can't really be improved to align with the district's interests. So I do think we would want some guidance on the nature of the amendments we would be seeking.
Well, obviously, I think it was not excluding joining of the union. And did you have something else, Brian?
Well, I guess I would request that maybe Bob address this. Do you feel like you got direction from the board on what kinds of amendments would satisfy our opposition? And if not, we should develop those.
Yeah, I would accept the board's, vote on a position, and then I would work with HR and legal staff to develop those based on the conversation with the board members today. We certainly want to protect the district's financial position and the ability to utilize seasonal employees or temporary employees, but we don't want to have a bar against, someone moving into permanent work with representation.
All right, so we have a motion second. Now we need public input. Anybody inside? No? Anybody online?
This is public comment period for action item number 7. Option 2, take other action as directed by the board. All the items will stay the same except AB 1484, which will be changed to oppose unless amended. Motion by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Day. President Vera Camp, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Motion carries unanimously.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Bob. Have a great day. Item 8, operations. Mr.
Actually, at this point in the meeting for actions items 8, 9, and 10, or no, excuse me, I apologize. It's after the next item.
Mr. Wilson? You got vials of something.
Yes, we do.
Move 8.
No, you have to listen to me. Even I don't want to listen to me.
I like the show and tell, so.
Not getting cocky. I promise. So good morning, board. Patrick Wilson, Drinking Water Operations Manager, here today to present on the El Dorado Hills Treatment Plant Clarifier Rehabilitation Project that's underway. Today's action is a contract amendment ratification. So the El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant, and I'll go over in a little bit more detail with some photos later, but has discovered that media has been escaping clarifier number 2 during the backwash cycle, as well as the flush cycle as well. So when the filter and clarifier are taken out of service to actually perform the cleaning process, we're noticing the escaping of effectively these beads. Due to the urgent need to get this rectified, mostly in advance of the pending weather that's coming, the district contracted with ERS, Industrial Services, who's performed work in the past for the district on these clarifier units, filter clarifier units. Because of that, the district is also requesting work to be performed on clarifier number 1, which I'll get into in a little bit. Removal of these clarifiers has a direct relationship to the actual water produced from the facility. And as you're all well aware, as temperatures continue to increase, demand continues to increase. So getting these repaired prior to high demand season is imperative for the district. So what is a clarifier? I'll start with that. Clarifier, all it's doing is removing large entrapped solids from the water prior to the water being applied to the filter. So it allows us to dose in advance of the filter, capture as much of those solids as we can, minimizing the amount that actually carries over onto the filter. As that system begins to fail, the unit filter run volume, the length of time that that filter is in service, diminishes, requiring additional backflows, minimizing production. So effectively, the clarifier is the first step in that filtration process to maximize the water that's produced from that plant. So clarifiers 3 through 6 were installed with Trident, which is a manufacturer, but they were installed with a steel structure. So they're standalone. Basically, I have a photo of it in a few slides, but it effectively looks like a semi-trailer from the standard point of view, but it's actual steel unit that's designed for this upflow clarifier process. Clarifiers number 1 and 2 were actually retrofitted from the 1960s filters that were installed. So originally in the 1960s, when the plant only had 2 filters, it was just an inline filtration plant. So water would come in, go across the filter, and go out to the distribution system. As technology improved in the 90s, the district made an effort and an attempt to retrofit those filters. It's been successful. A lot of years there, obviously, but with that in mind, the 60-year-old concrete was never designed for a clarifier unit to be installed on it, and therefore the steel structure is actually aluminum, which we'll get to in a few moments. So these clarifiers were included in the water treatment plant assessment that it's ongoing with Corolla. They currently are finalizing kind of the final wrap-up of that project. These were identified within that project to be life-cycled and therefore are in need of replacement, mostly from the structural components to that concrete being at life cycle. So just an overview. Many of you have probably been to this facility, but just if you haven't, so on the far right underneath all that lettering is where raw water comes in. It flows down that hill to where the clarifiers are called out. And then subsequently on the left-hand side, kind of in the middle where that box is, water's pumped out of there to the distribution system. And just for reference, clarifiers 1 and 2, just a reminder I should say, those were the ones constructed in the 1960s and have been retrofitted. Part of the challenge with that retrofit is the fact that it was not originally designed for the process that's now being administered on those 2 filter clarifier units. And then 3 through 6 were installed. In the 90s, 3 and 4 were installed, and then 5 and 6 were the early 2000s. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the Trident units themselves, again, a manufacturer, but they're an upflow clarifier. They operate the same way that clarifiers number 1 and 2 do as well. They're a steel structure, so as you can see in this photo, it's completely steel. The entire filter itself is wrapped in steel. Next slide. Now, clarifiers 1 and 2 are a little bit different. As you can see, they have a concrete substructure on the outside. And, normal operation is shown on the left. That's when the Folsom Lake is in good raw water quality. And the challenges that we have with the ever-changing dynamic of that operation of Folsom Lake has caused some algae in occasional years. And so that algae is subsequent as a breakthrough of the process. So there, that algae is being directly applied to the filter, shortening the life operation of that filter by requiring additional backwashes. So managing that with ever-growing changes in water quality is a challenge that these clarifier and filter units are exposed to. And then we get to the failure. Originally, ERS was brought out because we had believed that there was a gasket failure around the actual aluminum grating that holds the clarifier beads back. So they're buoyant clarifier beads. I don't have a great examination for you other than, in a flush sequence, and then subsequently when they go back into production, they'll fight just like anything to get back to the top of that clarifier unit. Within there, those beads were being noticed in the flush cycle, so in our equalization basin, we were noticing beads floating in there. What we found was there was damage to the gasket. It actually had a few small tears in it, about the size of maybe a silver dollar. They were allowing beads to escape, but on top of that, the aluminum grating that's to hold those beads back, along with the mesh, had actually began to deteriorate to the point where when they removed the actual grating, it fell apart in their hands. And so one of the challenges that we have is that we can't go back with like stainless, like a 316, for example. That concrete structure cannot actually take it. It was not designed for it. The other filters, 3 and 4 have been retrofitted. 5 and 6, we have all the parts on hand in the event to replace one of those, if that were to become. And Outingdale Water Treatment Plant, just for reference, does have a same but a smaller version of these filters. We believe has been replaced, but we do have material available in the event that this does occur. The cost of these beads is extraordinary. I don't know offhand how much this costs what's in my hand, but I do know it's a lot. We do everything we can to actually get the beads out of the equalization basin into 5-gallon buckets, and we will sift them out and put them back into the unit once the repairs are made. So the scope of work, ERS came in, as I mentioned, to evaluate clarifier number 2. And then they subsequently found additional deterioration, which staff directed them to immediately rehabilitate. And because of that, and the age of clarifier number 1 as well, the district requested and initiated a contract with ERS to perform the work on clarifier number 2, and then subsequently provide pricing to perform identical work on clarifier number 1, mostly from the unit, the run time as well as the installation time. It's likely that the gaskets are in a similar shape and just haven't gotten to failure yet. And rather than to be caught in the middle of summer without any material or without any of the structural material or any way to repair that in time, we worked in conjunction with the general manager to initiate that portion of the contract. With these costs, so clarifier number 2, so the initial cost, as I mentioned, was coming out to review the condition and why the beads were escaping. The contract amendment number 1 was the replacement of the aluminum grating as well as the fine mesh. And then the item today is change order contract amendment number 2 for clarifier number 1, which is to perform all the work that we have completed for clarifier number 2. So clarifier number 2 was performed last Friday. We're still going through a process right now where we're qualifying and utilizing that clarifier. We're still noticing some beads that are coming through. We're working with ERS to get that resolved. So the funding, as the contract amendments were initially charged to the drinking water operating budget, we are requesting board authorization for $128,760 in capital funding. It is included in the general water treatment plant assessment replacement program. To be clear, this work is not anything more than a rehabilitation to continue the operation of that facility. It's not a rebuild of the actual filter or that concrete structure. This is to maintain the service that we're trying to administer at this time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, not to belay the discussion about approving this or whatever, when we put in the new straw into Folsom Lake, it was deeper. Did that bring a lot of the green moss, or what did you call
Algae.
it? The algae, did that bring it up into our plant because it was down deeper? Had nothing to do with that?
No, so that algae is at the higher level. So we have 3 intakes now where historically, the old, as we call it, the B side was much deeper. In fact, our lowest point on the new system on the A side pumps is the same elevation as the B side. However, on those higher intakes, when the lake is drawn down and we're still running on that higher intake, which was the example I had in that photo,
Okay.
we did get algae at that time. There's an agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation that we submit annually in May for planned operation of that facility, the raw water pump station. This year we submitted, it's likely we're not going to move out of that the very top screen to actually take water out of the lake, and part of that's in part because of the lake elevation. But as they continue to drop that elevation, we do have the flexibility with the Bureau of Reclamation to drop to a lower intake due to source water challenges. And in that time, we didn't have the ability to actually drop because we were pumping directly off the top of the lake for the project. So we were kind of stuck on a barge pump at that point, dealing with the algae, which is one of the challenges we had. Since the installation of that particular project, we haven't seen an uptick in algae. We have seen an uptick in organic material on the different levels. We have noticed that, but not in terms of the actual algae.
Okay, thank you.
Environmentally, this project is exempt from CEQA, as is a replacement of existing facilities. And if approved, staff will file a notice of exemption. And option 1 is to ratify the general manager's approval of a contract amendment to ERS Industrial Services in the not-to-exceed amount of $64,380 the emergency rehabilitation of El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant Clarifier Number 1 and authorize funding of $128,760 for clarifier fabrication and installation of the El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant Clarifier Rehabilitation Project.
Director Anzini?
Yes, I'd like to make a,
Actually, we have a motion
oh,
second.
we did?
We did. Yeah, they're good. First, right off the bat. We let Mr. Wilson give the presentation. So, you got him? Motion second?
We have, action item 8 has, option 1, motion by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Day. Now's the time for, public comment.
Public comment? Seeing none inside, anybody on the outside?
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. Does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 8. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Wilson. Now, we're at item 9, 10, and 11, and I will be recusing myself on all 3 items, if that's the way you want me to do it, Madam Clerk. and
Actually,
Director
Vice
Day.
President Day will take over at this point in the meeting, but during each item, you will have to state separately that you're recusing yourself.
All yours, Director Day.
Move 8.
You meant 9?
And I can't do it, we got to do them separate.
Well, we did 8, we just
We
did
already
8.
did 8, so you mean 9 and 10.
So
Director Day?
can we do them, we have to do them one at a time? Right. Yeah.
I'll
So
second.
I have a motion to approve item 9, general warrant registers. Do I have a second? Second from Director
Who was the
Dwyer.
motion?
George, you did.
And I will be recusing myself. Director Veerkamp will be.
On item 9.
Item 9.
Are there any public comment on
If
item 9?
members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 9, option 1, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Dwyer, with Director Veerkamp recusing himself. Now is the time. Vice President Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 10, general warrant registers.
I'll move option 1.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second.
And
Do we
Director
have any-
Veerkamp will be recusing himself.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on item 10?
This is the public comment period for action item number 10. Option 1, moved by Director Dwyer, seconded by Director Anzini, with Director Veerkamp recusing himself. Vice President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 10. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
All right, thank you. We'll now move to our final item, item 11.
Okay. My name is Kaylee Longchamp. I'm an associate engineer here at the district, and I'm here to talk about the Four Bay Road and Drop-Off Road waterline replacement projects.
Thank you. Yeah, speak.
Sorry. Previous board action. So as you can see, these projects have been part of the CIP and part of planning since 2018. And we're finally going to get to build them. Next slide.
Pardon me, I have a question. Should Director Veerkamp recuse himself now at the start?
Probably from the entire item. I will,
Sure.
yeah, I will be recusing myself from the entire item, but not leaving the room. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. So a summary of the issue, we have a lot of unlined steel and asbestos cement pipe up in the Pollock Pines area, and it has exceeded its useful life. As it's gotten older, the frequency of the leaks have increased, and the pipes that are going to be replaced as part of this project, they have experienced 22 leaks in the past 4 years. So that picture on the right there, that is actually a picture from one of our more recent leak repairs. So our current best practice is that when we have a leak and we have already more than 2 repair bands on the piece of pipe that is leaking, we just pull that piece of pipe out, put a new piece of pipe in. So as you can see, that piece actually had 6 repair bands. Next slide. So a little background, these are 2 separate projects. However, because they're so close together geographically, we went ahead and bid them as one contract. And this was to achieve an economy of scale for the pricing. Next slide. So this is a map showing the leaks in the area. I've highlighted the water lines that will be replaced as part of this project. And so you can see this is the leaks in the last 4 years. The green leaks are the service line leaks, and the blue ones are the main line leaks. And this is showing the 22 leaks in the last 4 years. I'd also like to point out where 14 Mile Tunnel is. Right there, yeah. So that's 14 Mile Tunnel that goes into Forebay Reservoir. We have found drinking water, chlorinated water seeping through the tunnel walls, and that's because of the leaking pipelines above it. The tunnel is underneath Forebay Road, and the pipelines are above it, and they're leaking into the tunnel. So ongoing leaks from the pipeline can impact the structural integrity of the tunnel, so it's an added bonus to get this fixed now to keep the tunnel in good working order. So these are a couple demonstrative photos of the area. The one on the left is of Forebay Road, and as you can see, it's a paved road. It's also a county road. The one on the right is Drop-Off Road. It is a private gravel road. So the scope of work, the project will replace approximately 3,500 lineal feet of pipe on Forebay Road and its connecting streets. This includes both asbestos cement pipe as well as steel pipe. It'll also replace and relocate a below-ground pressure reducing station and replace 53 service lines and install 7 fire hydrants. Drop-Off Road will replace approximately 1,700 lineal feet of asbestos cement pipe and other pipe materials. And it will also replace and relocate a below-ground pressure reducing station, replace 11 service lines, and install 2 fire hydrants. So we bid this project twice. The first time we bid it to pre-qualified contractors that had been previously pre-qualified in 2021. Unfortunately, we only received 1 bid, so we rejected the bids and rebid the project, this time opening it up to more than just the pre-qualified contractors. And we received 3 bids. So as you can see, the 3 bids were similar in price to one another. However, it was more expensive than the engineer's estimate. However, the bids reflect continued increased costs similar to other recent projects, so we're not worried about that. The bid from Doug Veerkamp General Engineering was the lowest responsible and responsive bid, therefore staff is recommending award of the construction contract to Veerkamp. We also released a request for proposals for construction management and inspection services. And we released that in March, received proposals in early in April, and then received updated costs. When we bid the project a second time, we had to shift the schedule, which shifted portions of the project into 2024. So we then requested updated costs associated with 2024 pricing for that portion. So we received 3 proposals. Unfortunately, one withdrew their proposal after we had received them, and then another was deemed non-responsive. So we were left with a single proposal from MCK Americas for $201,000. So staff reviewed the project's activities and determined that they are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. If the project is approved, they will file a notice of exemption. So public outreach. During design, we had a lot of outreach with the public as we worked on what are called meter sheets for all of the service line replacements. After the award of this contract, we will also be sending letters out to all property owners, tenants, schools, and businesses within 500 feet of the project. It'll include the project description, project schedule, as well as my contact information, and any individual with questions can call the district.
Go ahead.
Okay, just a concern, because I'm having a deja vu moment as a brand-new board member here regarding Forbay and the notification. So I just wanted to kind of like encourage that we have proper notification, because some of the people who live up there are vacationers and may not receive the information. Just, I don't want to revisit that, so.
Are we doing door hangers? Because I know on some of our other projects where there's potential service interruption, that's, for instance, the canal, that was very useful to let people know.
Yes, so we will have door hangers prior to any interruption of service.
Okay.
When you do these things, could we exempt or amplify on the fact that we're going to put 7 fire hydrants in along that? I think that's really important to people. Amplify on that, and besides the reliability issue, okay?
Yeah, we can make sure that's in the letter. So, like I said, we'll be sending letters, the door hangers prior to any interruption of service, and then,
Best.
yes, with increased fire flow, so all around a good project. So this is the estimated schedule. As you can see, we'll be performing the Forbay Road portion of the project this year, and then the drop-off road portion next year. So this is the funding requirements in addition to the construction contract and the construction management and inspection services contract. We will also have on-call geotechnical services, El Dorado County Department of Transportation inspection fees, capitalized labor, and some contingency. Okay, here's the long one. Award contracts to Doug Veerkamp General Engineering Incorporated in the not-to-exceed amount of $4,171,246.80 for construction, and MCK Americas Incorporated in the not-to-exceed amount of $201,000 for construction management and inspection services for the Forbay Road Waterline and Drop-Off Road Waterline Replacement projects, and authorize additional funding for the Forbay Road Waterline Replacement project, project number 18040.01, of $3,123,978.50 for construction, $131,030 for construction management and inspection, $29,940 for geotechnical services, $150,000 for El Dorado County Department of Transportation inspection fees, $93,000 for capitalized labor, and $328,495 in contingencies, for a total funding request of $3,856,443.50. And for the drop-off road waterline replacement project, project number 20030.01 of $1,047,268.30 for construction, $69,970 for construction management and inspection, $11,820 for geotechnical services, $57,000 for capitalized labor, and $112,905 in contingencies, for a total funding request of $1,298,963.30, which projects staff has determined are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. Option 2, take other action as directed by the board. Option 3, take no action. I recommend option 1.
Could you
Move
go back?
one with a comment.
I didn't quite catch all of that. Could you?
I move one with a comment. This is, I think, is indicative of our problem with rates. This project is $900,000 higher than the engineer's estimate. And I think it transcends the whole economy of where we are with our replacement schedule.
All right, I have a motion with comments. Do I have a second?
I have a second with no comment.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
This is a time for public comment on action item number 11. Option 1, did you want me to repeat that, Director Day?
No, thank you.
Moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Dwyer. Vice President Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on action item number 11. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
All right, thank you. And I believe we're going to closed session. Counselor, do we have an estimate?
Vice President Day and members of the board will be meeting in closed session as reflected on today's agenda under the item closed session A. I anticipate that the board's consideration of this item will require at least 20 minutes.
All right. So
For the purpose of this Zoom meeting, this meeting will be shut down and we will come back not prior to noon. It could be later.
Yes, Madam Clerk, let the record reflect that we've returned from closed session. Council, do we have anything to report out?
President Veerkamp, the board met in closed session and conferred regarding the matter agendized as closed session item A. The board provided staff direction but took no reportable action, and that concludes my report.
All right, thank you very much. Review of assignments. Jen, anything?
None today. Just reminder to board members to look at the tentatively scheduled items for the next meeting. Reach out if you have questions.
Very good. We are adjourned.
At 12:18.
12:18. Thank you, everyone.